This is Reimagining the Contact Center. I'm Marc Bernstein, and today I'm interviewing Lily Clifford, CEO and founder at Rime Labs. You know that feeling when you talk to someone and they are a deep subject matter expert in anything. Like it could be playing piano, it could be chess, it could be poetry or Russian literature or anything. And you know that feeling you get where you're like, wow, the amount of information I'm absorbing is incredible. And it's so amazing to see somebody who is so passionate about anything. Well, Lily is that person for voice and acoustic properties of voice and speech and human conversations. And she just absolutely blew me away. So, everyone, I hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I did. This is Lily Clifford, founder, CEO at Rime Labs. Lily, hey, so good to see you.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks for having me on.
My pleasure. I thought it'd be fun to start with a big question. What do you love about the human voice?
What I love about the human voice is how multidimensional it is. Like if we think about what sound is, here's how the human voice works, okay? You have your vocal folds. They are vibrating. Like quite literally, they're just opening and closing like somewhere between 80 to 250 times per second. If you cut off the human head right above the vocal folds, the sound of those vocal folds opening and closing would be like the sound of like when you're a kid and you put a playing card in your bicycle spokes and it's just like tick, 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 tick. It would be like that. And then what's happening above your vocal folds is, right, you're moving your jaw, your mouth, um, your lips, your tongue, the opening that goes from your mouth into your nasal passage, right? And what that is doing is shaping that pure tone, that just kind of clicking sound, into something that can carry linguistic content, right? Like you understand the words that I'm saying, but also, and I think in many ways, more importantly, carries a lot of social meaning. And by social meaning, I mean, right, like the way that we say something, the sound of our voice, people make judgments. People make what I mean by judgments is just like perceptions, right? Like we think someone who sounds like this is this kind of person. And it's not dissimilar in writing. Like you can kind of get a sense of like what kind of person is based on how they're writing, but like speech has infinitely more dimensions than just text. And so that's what I love most about it.
How did we figure that out as humans? And I know there's obviously no easy answer, but like, how did we learn to put together all of those tiny mechanics and the kind of deep internal tissue muscles and the jaw movements and the noises and the pauses? Like, how did and then of course there's the cognitive and social component. How did our
Right.
brains put this together?
I think open line of debate, to be honest, but it probably happened like 150 to 200,000 years ago, and is really what set us apart potentially from pre Homo sapiens human ancestors. And I think my perspective on it is it's probably independent of language. We developed these um, capacities for cognition, and language came out of that. And it doesn't have to be speech, right? Like there are people who never learn speech because they're born deaf, and they grow up in a community of deaf people, and the same richness that we bring to speech, they're bringing to signing. That's something that's very fascinating too about human language is that it's not even limited to one modality.
I remember from Sapiens, Noah Yuval Harari, that I believe he said that we humans discovered fire or harnessed fire for safety purposes and cooking food around 200,000 to 300,000 years ago. So is it possible that we were actually using fire before we were using our mouths?
100%, yeah. It's possible
Wow.
we were building stone tools, throwing spears, hunting in groups way before we were like putting sentences together.
So then how do human conversations work? If you go from what the voice is able to produce and how somebody, the listener is able to absorb it, then you now add another party and you have two people or multiple people going back and forth. Like what are the foundations of how human conversations work?
I think the foundations of them are. studyable, and people have been studying them either from like a analysis of conversation perspective, right? Like we know cross-culturally, like I grew up in California, and the kind of more West Coast style of interruptions, for example, it's like I finish my sentence, and then Mark, you're like, now it's my turn to talk, right? And if I think there's like a, like a Italian American legacy where the method by which someone's like signaling that they're done talking is just to say less and less informative stuff as an invitation for the other person to interrupt. Like someone, it just, that's just the norm. It's like you don't stop what you're saying and then now it's your time to talk. It's like, I'm just going to start saying kind of nonsense and then you're actually just going to interrupt me. And we all agree that that's how it happens. So I don't think like there's one answer, but, definitely from like just a voice AI perspective is very relevant, right? Because like I can guarantee you the way that conversations have never worked and will continue to never work is like I'm talking to you and I'm like, hey, by the way, if you're asking about this, press number 5 on your keyboard.
That's
So
so
I think that's what's
incredible.
really exciting just about like modeling this stuff is like getting more like a closer representation of how people actually talk, right? I don't think we understand completely, and we'll never understand completely, and that's what's so exciting about it.
I did not think about how different cultures and even different parts of the same country will signal that they're finishing up their turn in the conversation in different ways. And it's funny because you actually look at the voice AI players, and you look at what's happening in voice AI, and a lot of folks are talking about their turn taking and how good their turn taking is. But it seems
Right.
like there maybe is no single way to do turn taking.
There is no single way to do turn taking. There's no single amount of time that's cross-culturally normal to leave between conversational turns. So there's this huge and latency like in turn taking very important. Like we pick up on these kinds of things. And I think like the reason why there's so much emphasis on it in voice AI currently is because for the first time you can model some of this stuff really quickly. And so it's exciting. At the same time, if you were to ship, right, like a voice application in Japan and you were like, oh, the bot's going to respond to you in 200 milliseconds, they would be like, I really don't like that. Like, I want it to be a second. That's what feels normal to me.
It's funny. I ran a quick search on Gemini before this, and I said, "So, what is the median conversational, pause in between two speakers?" And it just found this article from the Journal of Cognition, and this article was called "Timing in Conversation" from 2023, and it said the median gap between speakers is 300 seconds. And then I look at all of these voice models, and they're all advertising, and I think you guys are actually in this mix of being able to do turn taking within 150 milliseconds or 200 milliseconds. So like it, have we won? Is it there?
I don't think it's there yet because, like, a lot of the approaches to building these applications don't just involve putting one model together. They involve putting 3 or 4 different models together. And for a sophisticated, like, I'm talking like actually sophisticated voice application, right? Like, where there's an access to, like people are buying something over the phone, right? Like, you need a connection to a point of sale system, a database with price and inventory, all this kind of stuff, right? Like that takes time. What I'm trying to say is like, no, it hasn't been solved. And like will continue to not be solved. And at the same time, I think like consumer expectations for these applications differ too. And what I mean by that, right, is like if you're making a large amount of outbound calling where people like, if they don't like what you're saying to them over the phone, they're going to hang up. Like they don't need to be talking to you. You're a bot right now. We have found that for every 100 milliseconds of introduced latency within this tech stack, that people are like 10 to 15% more likely to hang up. And the reason for that is they literally like, I don't have time for this. But I think like if you're calling your bank, if you're calling Chase Bank and you're like, hey, my credit card was stolen, people have a pretty wide patience for staying on the phone for sure. And so it kind of just depends too.
That's so interesting because I would imagine that 100 milliseconds is like below or maybe at the just noticeable threshold. If you had, two different, models and one of them was 100 milliseconds different than the other, you might not be able to actually be like, oh, that's the faster one, that's the slower one. Maybe you can,
Correct. That's correct. No, that's correct. Yeah.
but we can feel it. We just know it somehow.
We do. And if you're making millions of calls a month, it adds up.
Are the limitations now in other parts of the stack? Is it about, and I was kind of trying to break apart like voice AI, and I have four different dimensions, and I'm interested to hear if,
Mm,
the extent to which you think, I got it or how you would change this sort
mm,
of framework. And the dimensions that I kind of put down are stylistic, linguistic, cognitive, and like integrated. And what I mean by stylistic is basically the acoustic properties of the voice and the
mm,
turn taking. What I mean by linguistic is actually the words that are used. I am seeing like a lot of folks are now starting to like mash those two together. Um, you know, I then there's like cognitive, the ability to almost make some sort of decisions and be able to interpret what the other person is saying and be able to adjust to the circumstances. And then integrated the idea that you're interacting across systems. It seems like those are almost the four layers of what you need in order to stand up a voice AI. And what I was hearing from you is maybe the fourth layer, the integrated, actually just like the amount of time it takes from information to zip from one system to another system, and then to run through a database and search it and bring it back. That's the bottleneck. So I'd love your thoughts on, you know, how would you kind of change that framework that I just laid out? Like where would you maybe poke holes in it? And then where do you think the bottleneck is?
your framework makes sense. I think from the linguistics perspective, there's also just right, like, am I understanding what the customer is saying? And from a speech recognition perspective, still, I would say unsolved at this point. And the reason for that is not necessarily that, like, how to put this? Like, for example, my co-founder, Brooke Larson, prior to founding Rime with me, she was at Amazon Alexa, right? And I can tell you, like, across the board, and this is like 2018, 2019, this is true of Google, this is true of Microsoft, this is true of Amazon. And the reason for that is because there was research coming out of Stanford as well as other places that was saying these systems literally cannot understand African American English to the extent that they can understand standard American English. And the reason for that is not a modeling problem, it's just a data availability problem. And so you could look, right, like zip code by zip code for any of these assistant devices. I'm extrapolating a little bit about what I know about the space. So don't quote me directly on this, but like I'm guessing you could look zip code by zip code and say, okay, if the Google Assistant is being purchased in a zip code with high African American English speaking population, the device is not being used. And the reason for that is it's not usable, right? And so some I think some people would describe that as like a last mile problem, right? Like if we collect more and more data, we have the same approach to modeling, that like we will eventually solve this problem. Same goes for speech synthesis, right? Like from the stylistic perspective. And so I think there's kind of two sides of the same coin to what you're saying about like the linguistics and the stylistics perspective. Because right, like the voices that the cloud vendors ship, like the Google, Microsofts, and the Amazons of the world, it doesn't matter how lifelike they are. That is, right, like, do they sound as if a human could be producing this speech? And by and large, they do. They sound very lifelike, and it's because speech synthesis, from a modeling perspective, has come very far, right? Like the data you put in is what you get out. And at the same time, like you across the board, our customers are like, it sounds robotic. And what they mean by that, right, is not that like this doesn't sound like a human speech. What they mean by it sounds like not the way that a human would be talking in the application that we want to build. And so, like, from my perspective, at each of those four kind of layers that you mentioned, there are unsolved problems where we don't try to solve all of them, maybe eventually. At the same time, right, like it doesn't matter how good the integrated database is with all these, the data zipping around as you put it. It doesn't matter how good you are at recognizing customer speech, like alphanumeric sequences, right? Like how many times you have to ask someone to repeat themselves. If they hear the voice and they're like, I don't want to talk to this thing. I still feel, and again, there are last mile problems in each of these four kind of layers you mentioned, but like where Rhyme helps our customers across the board, doesn't matter if it's food ordering, if it's an outbound lead qualification, if it's a more prototypical kind of support IVR or IVA system. The way that we help our customers is like simply, how can we increase someone's willingness to be like, yeah, I'll talk to this thing? And by and large, like the way that the voice sounds and how relatable it is today, and it could change, but like today is driving the most impact.
Completely agree. And intuitively, that makes the most sense as well. One of the things that I think is interesting with the voice AI front, if you're talking to an AI versus human, is when you talk to a human, you have a whole set of social standards that are pre-programmed in your brain, ready to go. You know how to talk to a human. You know how, like, where you need to clarify yourself. You know, like, you kind of have this idea, when you're talking to a business about like almost status, like I'm the customer and here's what I expect, and I can be a little bit demanding, but not rude.
Right.
You know, you
Yeah.
have this. And then you get to an AI, and there's no standards. There's no standards.
No, you're
And
lost. You're completely lost. Yeah.
yep, I kind of like make fun that like I say things to Alexa I would never say to like my pets, you know?
Right.
Um,
No, that's a good way of putting it. Yeah.
and I think that's because it's just we're booting fresh. There's no social standards of how we interact with these things. And my guess is the closer that we get to lifelike and the more that they really do feel and sound human, the more like some deep part of our brain triggers and says, you know what? You can use the same social standards that you use with a human. You don't need to try to like, okay, I'm going to say it in exactly this way because I think if I say it this way, the model will get what I mean. Like,
Right. Right.
I think you almost your guard goes down.
Yeah, and like I think there's been surprising like so we've been in market for about a year. We were collecting all this data in our recording studio in San Francisco, training models with our design partners, and really we've been in market, like models in the market and actively selling for like a year. And very early on, when we were talking with product owners of these automated voice channels, they were saying, okay, like I would, like ask a question, like, okay, do you think the sound of the voice is impacting the performance of this application? And they would be like 100%, 10,000% yes. And then I would say like, okay, if we could increase whatever KPI it might be, like if it's call containment, if it's NPS, like if we could increase that by 10%, what would that mean for you in terms of savings? And I'd say millions of dollars. And I would be like, I think we can do that. And they'd be like, do you have data? And I would say, no, we don't have data. And so it took a little bit of time to get that data. And I would say, like, of course, like there's been amazing results from folks who are switching from like the robotic cloud vendor voices to Rime voices. And at the same time, I would say the stuff that's been most surprising is along the lines of what you mentioned, right? Like, yeah, of course, like NPS skyrocketing, call containment increasing, right? Like, but what's been most surprising is like we did a pilot with a large software focused BPO that's going to production now for their IVR system. And really, it's a very constrained problem. Like they're going to transfer someone to a human agent, but they just want to collect a little bit of information. Before they switch to Rhyme, 0%, and this is probably unsurprising. Like, when's the last time you said thank you to the bot, right? Like, never. When they switch to Rhyme, 20% of people are saying thank you before being transferred to the bot. Or a similar percentage of people are saying, actually, no, you don't have to transfer me. I want to keep talking to you. That for me has been the surprising results. It's like the most surprising KPIs that I think we try to surface for our customers during a pilot process is like, okay, NPS, call containment, average handling time, that stuff's all great. But right, like, what if you weren't worried about average handling time because people actually wanted to talk to this thing? Like, I think that's really the frontier.
So I love that the research you're pointing here, you have some really clear dependent variables, some outcomes that you're trying to generate and show that you can generate, reducing the overall handling time or, increasing containment. Have you guys, in terms like the independent variable, have you been able to like lump this all together into like a lifelike score or a human likeness score? Or is it still at the point where it's so complex that you have all these different variables and you're like, well, if we tweak, the latency variable by a couple points, then we get this improvement. If we tweak this by a couple points, or where is it at in terms of like in terms of how you all are thinking about advancing the system?
What you're pointing out is very important, right? Like, and we've noticed even in the last year as LLMs get smarter, that our customers' rate of call success increases, right? And that's something that today we don't own the LLM layer, so we have no control over. And so from just a outcomes reporting perspective, it is kind of a tangle of causes. And at the same time, everyone understands intuitively that if the voice experience is better, that the application should perform better. And we've been doing some pretty innovative stuff too. It's like, let me take a step back. Like when we're talking with a prospective customer, what is in common across all these different use cases is that our customers have a very strong idea about what a successful call means in terms of outcomes. If you call your local pizza restaurant to order pizza, what does a successful call look like? It looks like you successfully ordered the pizza and didn't hate it. And third, right, like all this downstream stuff, like did you order again after that? Right? Like were you upsold on the second call? Right? Like these are like really clear signals. And so we actually built this reporting API so that our customers could report to us, right? Like what are the dependent variables that they care about? Because every customer is different, right? Like they might care about even like the zip code in which this call took place, right? Like the brand that they're supporting. Because we have customers that are supporting not just food ordering for um, Domino's, but also for Jet's Pizza in Michigan, right? Like, and those are very different brands with different customer bases. So like we ingest all this information, including, right, like which voice they're using, which rhyme voice they're using. And then we can tell them, right, like for this brand in this zip code, this voice is performing outperforming every other rhyme voice, all else being equal. And like that's the kind of stuff that I think we're really excited about is like how can we with the understanding of the models that we provide to our customers say like here's what's working and it's working really well, right? And we're going to increase how it's working month over month.
So I'd love your thoughts on, the one voice to rule them all. And I think when people think about voice AI, they're like Scarlett Johansson. Do you see that voice AI will have that you guys will converge on an optimal voice, or that the space will converge on, a kind of thin band of optimal voices? Or do you think it will explode in complexity and richness and have a bunch of different voices? Will the voices like mimic the person who's calling, which in some ways could be really great and give you a personalized experience, and the other ways seems like a little bit like pandering? Like, what is going to happen in terms of the ecosystem of voices?
It's an amazing question because like one thing that we were learning very early on when we were exploring our early design partnerships is like the status quo in building any voice application 2 years ago was you pick the one North American English accented voice from Google, Microsoft, or Amazon that your customers hate the least, and that's the one you put into production, right? And I think like we all have this understanding that if I call Taco Bell, say, like, and I heard the Scarlett Johansson her voice, I'd probably be like, this is really effing weird,
Yeah.
right? Like that's really effing weird, actually. Like I would be creeped out. Um, and so I don't presume that I think like here are the voices that for this use case should be put into production. They're performing, right? Like, and also the secret is like well, this is not a secret. I'm saying it now, public record. Like I'm not a voice casting director, right? Like, and oftentimes neither are our customers. We're selling to a VP of engineering, right? I think that the answer is definitely like one of proliferation. Like people should be testing this stuff, and our customers have found in partnership with us, like some voices are outperforming other voices by a rate of like 2 to 3 times, which is it's kind of hard to comprehend. Like again, like in some cases, like that means millions of dollars. And so I don't necessarily think it's going to be like, if Lily calls Taco Bell that I'm going to hear a voice that sounds like my voice. I think it's more like I'm going to hear a voice that I respond best to, right? And that doesn't mean a voice that sounds like me. In fact, I think in many cases it's not. And so I think our goal should just be to expand the kind of palette, right? Like that our customers are able to choose from, and then to affect the kind of call success that they're looking to affect. And I think that's still like TBD how we all do that.
That is so interesting, because my initial thought was, yeah, people probably do respond best to mirroring. And then I just had this funny little thought experiment in my head of, okay, imagine that for the first 5 seconds while you're asking a question, you know, uh, the model is actually training, its model to be able to quickly respond in as close to your voice as possible. But good point, that might not be it. So it seems like maybe it's like a model selection sort of thing. Like, a company
It's
has,
yeah,
yeah.
it's really like I mean, a super large contact center with tens of thousands of human agents, like they're driving 300, 400 bips of increased customer satisfaction by connecting you to the right human agent. The same thing will happen with these AI agents too, right? Like the AI agent will be capable in many ways, but I think also just the personality of the bot, people respond differently to different kinds of personalities. Many cases, like people, like our customers know a lot about you already, right? Like they have an internal CRM that's like, you ordered here before, you're, in this age demographic, you're tech savvy, whatever it might be. Like that's the kind of information that our customers want to take advantage of for personalizing the experience during the, even if they're going to be transferring someone to human agent, like during that interaction with the bot.
Where do you think that ends, or where should it end? Because you could imagine that these voices are able to pick up, like, I'm sure that if you actually were to try to break apart the human voice and how we talk and the words we use, you could probably map hundreds or thousands of properties of my voice, and you could theoretically have a model that can predict what kind of voice I would respond to best. And oh, it sounds like my grandmother from childhood. I'll do whatever that voice says. Like, how far do we go there until people are going to say that's maybe not best for everybody?
That's a good question. I don't know if I have a concrete answer. And at this point, like we're still very early in this technology adoption curve, and people are still like, I think people are trying to wrap their head around that themselves. And today, right, like what drives customers to Rhyme is like, I don't want that voice that sounds like an audiobook.
Yeah.
And so like I think that's just the first step is like how do we put voices in our customers' hands where right like they sound like someone who could be working at a contact center or like someone you would be friends with. And I think a lot of these second order problems around optimization are probably 2 or 3 years in the future. Where does it end? I don't know to be honest, I don't know where it ends. What do we want these applications to look like? I think there's an understanding that people don't want to be, I mean, people, here's what the status quo is today. Like you hate talking to the bot. A year ago, we were talking with customers who were saying, actually, we want a robotic sounding voice because it makes people feel like they're not being tricked, right? Like you get halfway through the conversation, there's some natural language understanding bug, and then people realize in a split second, like I'm not talking to a human being, right? And that's really, there's a feeling of deception. And what we're starting to see now too is just like, and I don't know if it's because like the proliferation of more advanced, kind of more consumer facing applications, like the advanced voice mode from OpenAI or improvements to Alexa and the Google Assistant, et cetera, but like consumer expectations for this stuff are leveling up too, like very fast. There's like higher consumer expectations for how these voice applications sound, how smart they are, how quick they are to respond. And second, there's just a higher tolerance for talking to a bot whatsoever.
How close do you think we are to these AI voice bots being truly indistinguishable from a human?
I think in many cases we've been there for like a year. I know that because I listen to call recordings from our customers. In many cases, like customers have to acknowledge, they have to say, right, like, hey, you're talking to a bot right now. But from just a human experience perspective, like how willing someone is to talk to that bot, we've been there for a long time.
To what extent is that the case when you layer in the LLM aspect and the kind of cognition aspect? Um, at what point will it be indistinguishable, not just from a how it sounds, but from a how it acts?
I think it's funny because like if you talk to like people who manage contact centers, right? Like the best performing human agents are the ones that go off script. I think the same thing is true of our customers who are doing really sophisticated LLM based NLU for these automated voice applications. And I think too, right? Like many applications that our customers are building for, like it's a pretty wide problem space, right? Like if you're ordering a pizza, there's a lot of different things people do to order pizza, right? But the status quo used to be like you create using Google Dialogflow, right? Like a list of every possible customer intent, right? And then how the bot should respond to that customer intent. And you had this YAML file that like was thousands of lines long and contained every possible bot response in permutation. Now, right, like it's easier than ever to ship a voice application that approaches the sophistication of that kind of system with no configuration. Essentially, this like single prompt. That's not going to get you that far, but it'll get you maybe 80% of the way there. At the same time, right, like a lot of the use cases that our customers are building for, and a lot of the circumstances in which someone would have like an onshore offshore contact center, they're pretty constrained problems, right? Like you're calling someone because they filled out a form, you're calling someone to remind them of an appointment, you're calling someone um, to tell them that there was a suspicious charge on their debit card, right? Like these are pretty constrained problems. How to put this? They're hard applications to build. I'm not going to say that there aren't, but they're not rocket science. And so to answer your question, I would say like, we have a customer who's making millions of outbound calls. Someone filled out a form, says they're interested in buying something. And the goal for that call is to get someone talking to a human agent who is obviously very capable of answering questions about something that someone wants to buy. And they're converting customers that are at like 3 to 4%. And the average time that someone talks to this bot is like 4 or 5 minutes before they're being transferred.
Wow.
And we have a partner, Mirage. This is a super fascinating use case. Mirage Security. They work with information security teams to create voice phishing simulations, right? Like they clone the voice with the consent, right? Like the voice of the chief information security officer or the CEO, and are saying, right, like, hey, they're calling every support engineer and saying, hey, I'm locked out of my Google Workspace account. Like, can you help me? The average time that one of these employees of these companies is talking to this bot is like 45 minutes. And they're getting passwords like, I don't know what it right, but a significant rate they're getting passwords.
Wow.
And so I don't know how consumer expectations are going to change in the next 2 to 3 years in response to that, but it is happening and it has been happening.
It's super interesting with my parents. I've told them I was like, "Hey, we need a password, like a one that's in our brains that only we know, and it's like a secret phrase that whenever I call you and I ask you something that's personal information, or I ask you something like, "Hey, can you send me money?" or anything like that, that I need to give you the phrase, because there will be a the ability to clone voices that soon will be either nearly indistinguishable or completely indistinguishable. And I just want you guys to start getting ready. So we've been practicing that. And anytime that I reach out to them and I say, oh, hey, can you remind me who is that friend of mine in childhood? I'll make sure that I include the phrase. And it's funny because like they still kind of treat it like, oh, Mark, this is so funny. You're including the phrase. And I'm like, guys, I'm
No,
telling
you're
you,
like, I'm
I'm
100, I'm
serious.
110% serious. Yeah, no, it
Yeah.
makes sense. Yeah. And like, as with anything, like nearly indistinguishable is in many cases more than enough, right? Like because if you're calling 100 people, all you need is one person to give you that information. It's like throwing, it's social engineering in a way that has never been possible before. It'd be like going to the Google office and throwing a bunch of USB drives into the parking lot. You're just hoping
Yep.
one person plugs one in, right?
Yep. And it doesn't even necessarily need to be the fault of the consumer. You could be somebody who is at a concert and you say, I'm sorry, I'm at a concert. What's the thing? And if the voice is close enough, you can't tell. You could be sick, or in the hospital and you're kind of groggy, and the voice sounds close enough. There's so many different. It doesn't even need to be that one out of 100 quote fall for it. It could be that 1 out of 100 are in some sort of circumstance at that exact moment where you can't quite make out the distinct properties of that voice to be able to realize it's not authentic. What is next for Rhyme? Like when you guys are thinking about where you want to build, where are you guys going next?
We've been really strongly focused on a lot of these. We're just now noticing that, like, for these really large software focused BPOs, customers are starting to say, like, hey, the voice needs to be better.
Hmm.
And so we've been creating really hyper computationally efficient speech synthesis models, deploying them on-prem. And their dirty secret is like, there are premium priced products on the market. And at the same time, like, and I think there will be a race to the bottom in terms of price on a lot of these things. And I really truly see that as a good thing. And the reason for that is like, if you're handling tens of millions of phone calls a month, you literally cannot pay the Google price for text to speech. And so like there's just so many use cases where if you're calling, right, like your bank, there's a reason why the voice experience is bad, and it's because this stuff is still expensive at scale. I'm really excited to make the most recent model release, our Arcana model, which is the most realistic, relatable text-to-speech model on the market on-prem and in the hands of some of these really large contact centers. Because what it's going to mean, right, is like I want when you call any business, that business should be speaking rhyme, and that business should be able to tell that like it has a business outcome, and that business outcome is increasing month over month. And so there's a lot of really cool platform level technologies that we're making possible for developers to A/B test in production, to visualize the impact of the individual voice, of the large language model, the prompting strategy for the large language model on call success. And at the same time, like there's still so many like really basic last mile problems. Well, they're not basic. There's a reason why they're last mile problems. Well, like, let me give you a concrete example, right? Like if you call, if you're building phone ordering for Taco Bell, it doesn't matter how relatable the voice is. It doesn't matter how lifelike it is. It doesn't matter how cost effective it is. It doesn't matter how easily deployable it is. If that voice can't pronounce the word gordita, you can't use the product. And it's shocking to say, but like as the state of the art increases in speech synthesis, people are shedding that controllability today. And so I'm really looking forward to marrying these large language model approaches to text to speech with a controllability around pronunciation, around intonation that you were getting from, at this point, like what are considered legacy text to speech solutions. That's what's really exciting to us too from a modeling perspective, because it's true, like so many customers churn off of these really innovative startup solutions because I can't pronounce a bank number correctly, a bank account number correctly. You kind of have to push on the state of the art, like really big questions, like how do we get the right voice for the right customer? And you also just have to solve what I think many people think are of as basic questions, like how can we get this bot to pronounce this word correctly?
It seems like it comes back to the fact that these, in this case, I'm thinking LLMs, but that any AI model thinks differently than a human. And that doesn't mean it thinks worse, it just thinks differently. And I saw this example on X, which seemed to make sense. It seems legit, but it was talking about someone was asking LLM, why is it so hard for you to tell me how many letters are in the word strawberry? And what the LLM spit back was actually the way that the data is encoded in my model is not letter by letter. I don't have like letter by letter semantic understanding in my model. So in order to find that answer, I have to basically aggregate, from the web and from my training set, the different chunks and be like, oh,
Yes.
straw is 5. I found straw, STRAW. Straw is 5. And then berry is another whatever it is. And now I think that strawberry is a combination of straw and berry, and I found two answers, and I put them together, and I can add that and get to the number. That it thinks differently than humans, and that is why some of these problems that seem so easy to us, like pronouncing gordita, like you say gordita, I say gordita, and even if you have someone, as long as they're kind of a native English speaker and they understand the phonetic uh, different phonetics that we use, you say gordita, and someone could have never heard the word before, and they'll get it right the first time. But the models, because of how they quote unquote think, they struggle with that kind of stuff.
I would say like my kind of hot take here is like that we probably shouldn't be calling it machine learning. We should be calling it machine prediction. It would be much more accurate. And the reason for that is right, like, and it's not, I don't want to say it's like completely orthogonal to the way that humans make predictions in real time. At the same time, what you're saying is true. Like the way that they make predictions today is not how we make predictions. And maybe that delta decreases over time. And it's also, it could be reliably the case that like in many cases, there's quote unquote superhuman performance on prediction of pronunciation for like, say like any given name. Like I grew up in the United States. Like we work with a lot of customers in the UK who want Irish and Scottish names to be pronounced correctly out of the box. I don't know how any of these names were pronounced. None of them, right? Like if it's Neve, right? Like and it's spelled Niamh. I had no clue, right? At the same, like in a machine learning model might have superior performance to me, right? Like in predicting the pronunciation of these words. At the same time, right? Like if you're Taco Bell, you don't want superhuman performance. You want gordita to be pronounced correctly, right? Like that's the kind of those are kind of two different criteria.
Based on everything that Rime is working on and your research background, and also the other companies that you're coming across in San Francisco, that are all building some version of the next era of AI. Big question, where do you see AI going in the next, call it 3 years?
I think I said this earlier, like we're still very early in the enterprise adoption curve for these technologies. So like we've been working with cutting edge leading software focused contact centers and BPOs who are just now beginning to put some of this stuff in production. And so where do I see it? I honestly think we're on like a 3 year trajectory for this to just reach some kind of saturation, maybe longer. And what's going to happen in the meantime, right, is that the state of the art will increase. Like, and progress may continue exponentially. It may not. It, in some cases, for some of these models, may have already plateaued like 6 to 8 months ago. But like, it's going to take a long time for the billions and billions and billions of calls that are being made and received in America, even just this one country, to like benefit from all the advancements in technology. Like even if technology stopped today, right? Like the progress of technology and in AI stopped today, it would take a long time for saturation to happen. And in the meantime, what's going to happen is like prices are going to go down for this technology. It therefore can more rapidly and readily become adopted. And so I don't know. I think we're on a wild ride. Honestly, we're on a wild ride because like the fact of the matter is it's not stopping. Like the rate of progress.
Lily, this was super fun. Thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks for having us. It was really fun.